Fisk, who's going to be doing our talk and presentation today. And I got to meet Grant at Oshkosh AirVenture and got to chat with him about infrastructure, and that's what he's working on. He's had a company that he's been building for the past 2 years plus called Volatus Infrastructure. They're working on setting up vertiports and other associated types of infrastructure like charging for the eVTOL space. He's got some really cool stuff he's working on in his home state of Wisconsin that I hope he talks about today. And Grant, if you want to jump on in and help us to start to learn and begin a dialogue about infrastructure for eVTOLs.
Yeah. Hello, everyone. How are you doing? So yeah, my name is Grant Fisk. I'm a co-founder of Volatus Infrastructure. We're in Neenah, Wisconsin, which is all of about 10 miles north of Oshkosh, home of AirVenture. I'm in fact so close to Oshkosh that during AirVenture, the holding pattern for the planes during the air show circles literally right over my house. So it's a rather exciting week for me, whether I'm on the grounds or not. So yeah, we started Volatus Infrastructure a couple years ago at the behest of some friends of mine in the industry who 2 years ago recognized there was going to be a need for a vehicle agnostic infrastructure program out in the world, because at that time, most of the vehicle manufacturers were either working on their own or just hoping at some point someone would come up with a vehicle agnostic program. So we started to put together a program that we figured should be kind of scalable, affordable, and kind of something that is relevant for the needs of the industry today. I mean, there's, not to throw anyone under the bus or whatnot, but there's a lot of talk of the city of the future, kind of eVTOL 2040, all that kind of stuff, which is fantastic. But we kind of view the industry today as Tesla was 15 years ago, just getting started, getting ready to launch or take off, pardon the pun. And if there was an infrastructure program ready to roll out 15 years ago, Tesla would probably be 10 times the size as it is today. Instead, there was a lot of catching up and trying to figure out, okay, where should these go? How should they work? Who is going to set it up, et cetera, et cetera. And eventually Tesla just ended up doing it themselves instead of putting together a coordinated effort with a number of people. So that's what launched Volatus, and trying to, again, create a program that is applicable and affordable for today to meet the needs of a burgeoning industry. So let me get this up here. Can everyone see this?
We cannot see your screen.
Cannot. Okay, I thought
Not yet. Still seeing your beautiful face.
Oh, cripes, that's terrible. Hang on a second.
Don't worry about it.
Had all this squared away.
Yeah, no, of course. It always works perfectly until
exactly.
Until
it always works perfectly until it doesn't.
That's right.
Oh, here we go. Now I think I'm getting this. Desktop. It's always some stupid thing. How about now?
Now we can see. Yeah, perfect. Outstanding.
Okay. All right. So as you already know what my stupid face looks like, I won't start with the first slide. So to give you an idea of what we're doing, this is the rendering of what we're doing at Oshkosh. This is actually on site at Oshkosh. We're sitting adjacent to the existing terminal. Now, this is our smallest model, will be approximately 400 square feet, and it is designed. We started by targeting initially kind of the regional airports, at which everyone knows are struggling and half of them are even dying. So it's a matter of also assisting, help bring relevance to the regional airport industry once again. So being able to offer something that can be an amenity that will help drive traffic to those is something that we thought was very important. So this is something that can be used as 24/7 operations, as a number of regional airports are not 24/7 operations. This can also very easily and affordably be set up as a standalone operation outside of an airport. Now, we also decided to go for a modular construction type process here to ensure be able to ensure rapid rollout of this technology. If the eVTOL industry grows at even half the speed that it is anticipated, there's going to be a requirement for vertiports very, very quickly. So we can't spend a year or even 10 months planning and constructing these things. These are structures that are going to have to be rolled out very widely, very rapidly. So once everything's on site, we're anticipating these to be able to be assembled in a matter of five days to a week, weather permitting. So this is kind of what this is what we've come up with. Vehicle agnostic charging station is kind of the next big thing. So again, it's, you know, from an infrastructure standpoint, and if we're asking people to invest money in creating a vertiport and setting up vertiports, we can't have a dozen or even half a dozen different charging stations there. So creating vehicle agnostic charging is very important. Now, we were very fortunate very early on in our process to get communication from a number of eVTOL manufacturers who are happy to share their charging protocols they're going for, or were using at that time. The majority so far, and if for the OEMs out there who are on this, please correct me if you have some other information. Everyone is accepting for the time being, kind of sticking with a CCS1 or CCS2 charging protocol. It is known, people understand what it is and how it works. So that's what we've been designing around for the time being. We do know there is, some people are talking about getting up to the MCS protocol, which is the megawatt charging station and charging protocol. We are seeing there's going to be some difficulties in getting to that and sustaining it, especially on a national level. The electrical grid, as everyone knows, just will not be able to handle the number of megawatt charging stations that are going to be required. So once we get to that point, we're not quite sure how that's going to roll out and be able to be kind of offered into the grid. We are working on and we'll be offering a kind of a battery backup or kind of quick charge system. So if we do get to the MCS standard, we'll be able to kind of supercharge, which will then be able to a aircraft. Well, that is also then fed via wind, solar, any other, even trickle charged off the grid. So we think that's something that's going to be pretty important to be able to, again, rapidly deploy vertiports, is have this kind of system in place in order to be able to handle the charging needs in the industry. One thing that's kind of also really important to us is kind of our philosophy of accessibility. And again, not trying to actively throw anyone under the bus, but there's been a lot of talk of concentrating on large markets, New York, LA, Saudi Arabia, Miami, London, Rome, what have you, which is great. That's absolutely great. But for someone like me who lives in the upper Midwest of the United States, and to not put too fine a point on it, we honestly don't really care what's going on in any major market anywhere. It doesn't matter. So in order to be able to provide proper impact for the industry, and to have it succeed, eVTOL technology is going to have to be available everywhere, which is why being able to showcase it in a place like Oshkosh is extraordinarily important. Not only bringing the vehicles there through AirVenture, and seeing Opener fly this last year was absolutely fantastic, and seeing Volocopter fly a couple of years ago was absolutely brilliant. But to being able to prove that eVTOL can succeed in a city of just a few tens of thousands of people is going to be vitally important, to be able to show that, yeah, this is a viable industry and it isn't just going to be used by millionaires wanting to avoid traffic jams. Being a grandma or grandpa that want to see the grandkids more often, 20-minute flight instead of a 2-hour drive is going to be absolutely extraordinary. So accessibility for us is time, cost, location, integration, and diversity of markets. Time, as I mentioned before, for the industry, for the infrastructure side of it, we need to be able to deploy infrastructure very rapidly. We can't spend years figuring it out. There needs to be solutions that can be ready today. Cost, kind of our cost. Our price point was the first thing we started with. At the time, it was a few $100,000. Unfortunately, the war in Ukraine and supply chain issues and inflation struck, and now we're bumping up a little bit closer to $1 million. For a municipality, though, or a regional airport, that is a very small price to pay for accessibility to this technology. Which also then means for the investors and owners, it will have a much quicker ROI, so they can invest less money, take less risk, and not have to charge as much again, or charge as much for use, which again makes it more accessible. Location, these will have to be everywhere. Oshkosh is just the start. We envision the industry having essentially, be able to offer your neighborhood vertiport. Every subdivision everywhere is going to eventually have a vertiport. And then so we have to have something here that is not taking up acres of space or even half an acre of space. With an elevated pad option that we're looking at, we'll be able to put up a vertiport, an FAA, ESA, et cetera, compliant vertiport for under 4,000 square feet of space, and possibly even under 3,000 square feet of space, which is going to be vitally important to be able to get these absolutely everywhere. Followed by integration, which is integrating this into a community. There is still a lot, I don't want to say misinformation, but I think a misunderstanding yet in the general public of what these vehicles are and how they're going to be utilized. They're not as they're not as noisy as helicopters. There's some people that straight up don't believe that. They aren't, they're not going to be kept in your garage necessarily. I know a Duroni though has got, your vehicle is, absolutely fantastic, and that could be the one that's going to lead the charge for the personal kept at home aircraft. Be absolutely fantastic. But the majority of the vehicles, these are not going to be last mile vehicles. So making sure these are integrated into communities properly so people understand how they work and how they operate and how they will be able to add to quality of life and not disrupt quality of life is going to be very important. And the last is diversity. These, in order to be diverse and give equitable access to everyone, we need to be able to put them in every community everywhere. It can't just be big markets. It can't just be in the wealthier suburbs. It needs to be absolutely everywhere. So again, that is extremely important. This is life-changing technology that will be able to save lives, increase quality of life. So we need to make sure there is an infrastructure option that can provide that can help bring the industry absolutely everywhere. One of the things that was asked to go over is financing. Who's going to pay for these? Who should be responsible for or paying for a vertiport? If we were to leave it up to the federal government to pay for it, it's going to take absolutely forever, and it's never going to get done. So it's a matter of being able to create an option that is affordable and viable for private and practical for private investment, not only for private business owners, but smaller airports especially. Now, we're very fortunate we have a fantastic financing partner of Momentum Strategic Partners. So we are able to provide financing options for both vertiport development, and also will be able to provide lease financing for vehicles, which again helps with accessibility by being able to provide vehicles and infrastructure to more people at a very affordable price. And yeah, where the future lands today, that's us. That's what we're hoping to be able to. That's what we're providing is the option that's going to work today for the industry. We're concerned about ensuring the industry has a solid start, is able to be successful today, and provide an infrastructure option that is practical and especially scalable. So as we move forward, it's an option that will be able to kind of bring eVTOL to everybody. So Hope that made sense. Hope I
Outstanding.
didn't plow through it too quickly.
No, that's fantastic. It was wonderful, Grant. So I noticed that you did not have aircraft landing on rooftops. You had a sort of an adjacent
Correct.
landing pad. And by the way, I think you might still be screen sharing.
Oh, let me try to better.
I can still see myself, and which is terrifying.
Let's
You know how bad it is when you can hear your own voice?
Stop
Well, this is
presenting.
like
There
10
we go.
times worse.
Oh,
Okay,
there
there
we
we go. Love it.
So
So
you can see my stupid face.
much better. So something that was interesting to me is to see that you had a landing pad immediately adjacent to your building, not on top. Is there any specific reason behind that?
When we started our dialogue with the FAA and trying to get an understanding of what's going to be important to them, what is not going to be important to them, one of the things they discussed was a lack of understanding of the flight characteristics of the aircraft. So they're taking the approach of until we get an understanding and more data is created in terms of flight characteristics and how the vehicles operate and what their safety features are going to be, the FAA would sort of prefer not to have any land on a rooftop. You know, a slightly elevated surface is one thing. We are working with groups in a number of states, especially on the West Coast and the Pacific Northwest, where we need to be mindful of environmental situations or seismic activity. So we will need to have a slightly elevated landing platform, and that's fine. It was rather interesting to me that the FAA put the not so fine point on it of they don't want to see a bunch of mini 911s, which I thought was an extraordinarily bold statement. But that's their concern is, you know, until we understand flight characteristics of aircraft, understand the battery technology, they really would prefer to kind of take the safer, more practical approach of having landings on grade, not on a rooftop.
You know, that makes sense. I hadn't given it a lot of thought, but there's some, you know, there's sort of some built-in inherent instability about having, you know, a very defined landing area that if you're off it by a little bit with part of your gear, you're going to have a potentially catastrophic incident.
Exactly.
Whereas with your setup, you know, if I'm off by 20 feet, I just landed in the grass. It's a non-event.
Correct.
Yeah, and you're talking about some more rural type operations, so you potentially got space to work with, or if you're partnering with an airport, there's space there anyway.
Exactly. And even if there is a catastrophic event, you're coming in 20 feet short. If you run into a 12-foot tall building, you know, it's going to hurt, but you're going to walk away from it.
Yeah, for sure. And everyone, I've got about 50 questions for Grant, but you might have some too. So please just use the raise hand function, or if you want to just jump in with questions for Grant, I'll just keep running the table if you let me, but I'd love to hear some diversity in questions and topics. But Grant, I like that you talked about trying to settle the charging infrastructure issue to the extent that we can. And, you know, this group, our kind of focus is shorter range, a lot of Part 103 smaller aircraft that are more regional in nature. And we, you know, those sorts of aircraft could really benefit from being able to hopscotch between chargers, because we might not have a whole lot of range to work with. Given that we've got smaller aircraft in the Part 103 space in the United States, we've got some weight limitations, so that limits what we can have on board in terms of batteries, which consequently limits our range. So to have the ability to connect the dots with infrastructure like yours would have a lot of meaning, but we would need to settle on a particular type of charging port so that we don't have to bring our own.
Correct.
And that's the crux of this, isn't it?
It really is. It really is. So far, you know, as I shared, kind of a lot of companies, you know, some of the larger OEMs are kind of actively using kind of CCS1 or CCS2 protocols, which is absolutely fantastic. That's something we like, because there's a number of port cities that we're talking to that are interested in developing multimodal transportation hubs and ports. So being able to offer one charging solution that can charge eVTOL aircraft, electric cars, electric trucks, there's even electric boats coming. That it just helps kind of ultimately keep the cost down, which will help kind of keep a industry successful and profitable. Because if no one's making any money at this because we have to spend too much money on infrastructure or whatnot, then it's just not going to work.
Yeah, you raise a good point there, especially regarding the cost. There's a lot of chargers are not inexpensive, and what's even a bigger deal is routing all that power. And especially if you're in a rural area, getting power lines of these magnitudes out to a place where there might not have been any before. To the extent that we're able to set something up where the utilization and therefore the costs are shared by several different vehicle types, that's beneficial. And you gave the example of also charging electric vehicles. And that makes sense to me, because if you can have one charger that at a, for example, at a regional airport or an FBO, they're gonna want to put in a charger anyway for cars. So if there can be a situation where they can install a charger that can be, charging both cars and eVTOLs, now you're splitting costs and getting a nice twofer, because they can recognize revenue from the landing fees and so forth, and not have to install chargers on both sides of the fence, on the parking lot side and the landing pad side.
Exactly, or at least not buy many different chargers.
Right.
Which again, you get economies of scale then come into place. You can buy more of the same instead of a bunch of different, which will have different systems, different potential protocols, different servicing schedules, et cetera, et cetera.
Right. Interesting. So CCS1 is also an electric vehicle, electric car.
Correct.
Plug, but with the voltages and the power output could be vastly different.
Yeah. So the CCS1, for the most part, with the information that we found, can pretty happily run up to about 100 kilowatts, which is considered sort of a fast charger for most electric cars. We've seen some eVTOL manufacturers want to get up to that 350 to 500 kilowatts. You definitely need kind of a fast CCS2 charger to get there. Now, this all goes back to understanding the needs of the industry today versus, say, 5 years from now. If we're starting, with and a CCS2 charger, especially, that pushing 500 kilowatt one is going to be six figures. That's a big investment to make, especially if, as the industry is just getting started, as there are no fully type certified aircraft, that is a big ask of people. Which also means, though, there isn't going to be, hundreds of cycles a day or 1,000 cycles a day. Many airports and many places for the time being are going to see maybe a small handful. So there isn't going to be a need today for fully rapid charging. And especially too, if the majority of the flights are short hops, and the vehicle does have a range of, say, or for a larger vehicle anyway, a range of, say, 100 miles, 120 miles, but it's mostly making 20-mile hops, you'll be able to get multiple flights out of a charge. For a smaller vehicle, like SkyDrive, like lifts, like openers, I don't know what your kind of requirements are, but presumably because you are limited with the battery size and what you can carry, you don't necessarily need a 500 kilowatt charger or even a megawatt charger. 100 kilowatt or 150 kilowatt charger, theoretically, and please correct me if I'm wrong, would be sufficient to get you guys charged up, quickly enough to be able to continue kind of, in 20 to, call it 20 to 40 mile hops.
Yeah, that makes sense. And also for, Part 103, at least in the United States, is recreational in nature. And so that some of those flights to a facility like yours might be sort of along the lines of the $100 hamburger that we're used to having flying Cessnas around just for fun. If the charging isn't, commercial operation is going to want super quick charge in 20 minutes, but if it takes a little bit longer in a Part 103 type eVTOL, then that's not as big a deal. presumably, just depending on the type of utilization.
Exactly. So it's just a matter of understanding, getting the industry up and going is going to be more important than ensuring some of the big guys like Archer or whatnot can charge in 5 minutes today. There isn't going to be 1,000 Archer flights a day yet. So that need for charging in 5 minutes or 10 minutes or whatever it is going to be isn't as important today. It's ensuring access, and the people who want to participate in the industry and have access to the technology have it with a plan to be able to scale up appropriately as the need changes and as the need arises.
Yep, makes sense. And everyone be thinking of some of your questions. Mine, in my own head, are brilliant, but my mom says they're dumb, and I think she's wrong. But anything you can think of, we'd love to hear from you.
Yeah, please do. Yeah,
Grant,
please.
I was going to ask about, how do we think about helping you, or what are the partnership opportunities? And I think the answer to that probably lies in how, infrastructure organizations can make money. Is it for you? Is it all about the build up front, and then that's your involvement is putting this together on the front end? Is it ever that you or your partners build it and then generate ongoing revenue for landing fees and charging fees or things like that? Tell us about that structure, and then that helps us to understand how we can think about partnerships to help you.
So the revenue structure is based on, essentially, this operates like a miniature airport. There's landing fees, there's storage fees, there's takeoff fees, there's charging fees if your state allows, but also too, there's advertising revenue. There's vending revenue. There's a number of different ways a airport makes money. So for us, it's a matter of, there's going to be there's a basic cycle fee, as it were, and will be sort of set up depending on the state. In the U.S. anyway, there are a number of states that do not allow you to resell electricity. So it's sort of dependent on and broken down with the state you're in. But there's a number of advertising opportunities, which again is just another revenue generator for the vertiport owner. We're not looking to own and operate vertiports ourselves. It goes back to being able to keep the price point as low as possible. So on the corporate structure side, if we need to be set up to own and manage vertiports, we would not be selling them for under $1 million to start. They'd be well north of $1 million because of the resources needed to manage that amount of corporate infrastructure. So it's, the majority of the revenue is going to be cycle fees. Then from there, in varying degrees, there's going to be additional storage fees, long and short term, depending on where the vertiport is. In Oshkosh, they're building a number of brand new hangars, which will be adjacent to our site. So there'll be fantastic opportunities for storage there. Advertising. There's going to be a great big spotlight on this industry for a very long time. And there's going to be a lot of opportunities. I think people are going to want to be involved in it because it is exciting, it is new, and it is different. And there's going to be companies that are going to want to plaster their names all over these things. So there's a lot of revenue opportunities out there for infrastructure owners that they haven't sort of realized yet. And I think that model will definitely grow and change and evolve as more of them are put up in more and more markets and more places. But for the majority of revenue will be generated by landing and takeoff and charging fees.
That makes sense. So, my background is in selling business jets, so I spent a lot of time in fixed base operations. And you're, from what I can gather, you're creating a small FBO for eVTOLs, but it's really the same premise. Is that an accurate assessment?
I would say so, yeah.
Yep. And they make their money from selling fuel, and a lot of fuel, and it tends to be good money for them. That's different as we move into the electricity age, because electricity is quite a bit less expensive.
It's quite a bit less expensive, but there's still a margin on it. So you're still moving a lot of electricity. So as we get to the point of these growing 2 landing pads, 4, 8, 10, what have you, and we're at the point of finally getting either megawatt chargers or whatever kind of the quick charging option is, there is still going to be a decent amount of revenue generated by selling electricity. But then depending on how the U.S. electrical grid is managed and upgraded and whatnot, by being able to set up a microgrid on site, especially at a regional airport, or if it is a neighborhood-based vertiport, a microgrid can sell electricity either back to the grid or through blockchain or what have you, be able to kind of figure out a way to monetize these transactions. If you're not able to resell electricity for cash, say, there are still many ways to monetize that transaction, which can be a whole additional revenue generator. So now you're able to monetize a transaction by selling electricity without actively charging an EV toll. So there are a number of additional revenue streams that are possible. We just don't know what they're all going to be at or how that transaction is going to work because no one's done it yet. But I think Oshkosh is going to be a really great test case for this. We can really see how this is going to integrate, how the revenue streams are going to work, and how this is going to work for future vertiport owners and operators.
Yep, that makes sense. When I was in high school, I had this great job of working as an usher in a movie theater. And the interesting thing about their business model is they don't make their money from movie admissions. They make their money from concessions.
Mm-hmm.
So there's something to be said for that in this business model as well, where you're, moving through a lot of people. That can be a revenue generator as well, whether it's a restaurant or just soda stand or things like that. That can also pull in some funds to offset some of these costs too.
Absolutely. And by maintaining a price point, at least kind of the starting price point that is relatively low, the more revenue streams you can put on it, the larger the ROI and the shorter term it's going to be to pay the note off on it.
Yep.
So
that makes sense. How do we think about setting up partnerships with you, and also how do we piggyback on what you're working on for Oshkosh in the future in terms of your vertiport, your sort of model vertiport that you were talking about there?
So we're working on, if you're an OEM, we are happy to be a charging station provider. If you are not interested in creating your own in-house, you're looking for a vendor to provide that, we're happy to work with you. We've got some announcements actually coming up where we'll be a preferred vendor for some EV tolls. We're also, with the locations we're looking to set up, we've got conversations right now with over 50 airports, some of which are close to being final contracts. We'll be able to set up testing test centers, also get some of the first true passenger carrying point-to-points not in major markets per se, but we see the ecosystem as being a bunch of miniature kind of hub and spoke models. So it's a matter of, we will be connecting to some of the larger markets, but we're not going to have primary operations there. So being able to kind of get in line to be able to, create and set up some of these and be a part of some of these first routes is going to be pretty important. For Oshkosh, Oshkosh is pondering, once we're open, having all eVTOL activities operate out of our vertiport. So it's going to be an even bigger spotlight on Volatus and all OEMs who are going to be there, because there's going to be your dedicated space with an actual vertiport, with charging capabilities and everything. And there's no bigger spotlight in aviation than AirVenture. So there's more than enough room over at Whitman Field to support as many OEMs as wish to come and join us.
I'm envisioning this sort of fantasy scene of 5 or 6 different types of small eVTOLs parked in a landing pad together.
I've had that same vision. This fantastic view. Yeah, 5 or 6 OEMs with the Volatus terminal and charging station in the background.
Yeah,
it's a
that's a nice
picture
vision.
if there ever was one.
Right, and it is, because it'll help people that are outside the business to kind of visualize where this is going and what it's going to look like, and sort of bring it to reality. Yeah. Steve, you have your hand up, and let it rip.
Hey, Grant, appreciate that. The question that I ponder often is that should the vertiports ultimately look something like an open blimp hangar? You know, I live in the Pacific Northwest. You live in the Midwest. The weather can be absolutely brutal. And so the question is, do we need to get the vehicles and the passengers out of that weather, whether we taxi the vehicles in undercover or they're actually possibly able to land inside a building, because that's a possibility.
That's a really good question. In my so to start with the aircraft landing and taking off in a building that size, that has yet to come up in conversation. No one's asked the question, I think, on that level with the FAA before. So I'm not even sure how they would look to manage or handle that. For keeping passengers kind of sort of out of the weather, that is, you know, it's easy enough to design an addition to the vertiport that would allow kind of protected, or at least kind of semi-protected walking between the vehicle itself and the vertiport. That's easy enough to do. But in terms of landing and taking off in something like a blimp hangar, that's a very good question. That's something I'll definitely post to the FAA next time I'm on a call with them.
Well, I think that, you know, some of the renderings of some of the fanciful vertiports have pretty significant eaves that go out. So maybe they're planning on, you know, landing nearby and then rolling them or taxiing them underneath the cover. I don't know. I haven't seen too many eVTOLs that are readily taxiable. But that's a problem to be solved, I guess. You didn't mention the SAE standard for the charge port, and I was just wondering if, you know, I think there's a kind of a dichotomy happening between, you know, guys like us on this call, and then what Joby's trying to do with the very quick turnaround, fast charge. We don't need those megawatts, you know. You know, the model is going to end up being, you know, you fly into a place and the aircraft can sit there for 2 hours on the charger. It's going to look a lot more, I believe, it's going to look a lot more like electric vehicle, you know, wheeled vehicles look today.
Yeah.
Where, you know, there's a use model where, you know, you park it in your garage at home and it's on the charger. So I just wanted to get your thoughts on that. You know, so the requirement for, you know, multi kilowatt charge is probably not required, and certainly not megawatt scale charging. So I guess my thing there is I wouldn't put a lot of emphasis on that, because that's going to be the domain of these companies that are trying to put these systems in that have very rapid turnarounds.
And I think that's also going to end up being kind of market specific, looking at a market like Oshkosh compared to a market like Los Angeles. Theoretically, Los Angeles is going to have massive turnaround cycle-wise, and there's going to be vertiports handling 1,000 cycles a day, if not more. So there is going to be a much larger need for fast charging, megawatt or other, in a large market like Los Angeles, compared to, say, Oshkosh or Grand Forks, North Dakota, or Holland, Michigan, or what have you. Regarding the SAE standard, I know, from what I understand of it, the SAE standard does offer more flexibility in terms of the power that it can handle. But so far, though, the OEMs that we've been talking to, no one's been talking about using the SAE standard. So we're sort of in a position of, you know, right now we're gathering information from as many OEMs as are interested in talking and sharing what they're using, but, you know, so no one's you know, mentioned SAE, so that's why we're kind of just going along with, this is what the majority of the OEMs are using, so that's what we're going to provide for until kind of the FAA or someone else says otherwise. I like the SAE standard, but, you know, do we want to get into a battle with essentially all the OEMs? Because that's going to be a fight that I think would just end up, you know, crippling the industry for a while and not kind of moving us forward.
Yeah, no, I don't think you need to get into a fight with them, but you need to probably accommodate, unfortunately, everything right now. Yeah. But I think, I mean, maybe I don't even know the answer to this. I do know that there are commercial chargers you can buy right now that support the SAE standard. Anybody know what the pipistrel aircraft use? Is that a proprietary thing, or is that the SAE standard?
It's funny. I just had a conversation with that about that with a pipistrel salesman, and I asked him the same thing. And let me check out my notes. Let's see. So they use the beta chargers, which are CCS1, and he mentioned that it is compatible with the Velis, which is their higher end aircraft, and not the Alpha. So Pipistrel's got two different types of chargers. He said the newer, I guess, more advanced aircraft, the Velis, does use CCS1.
Okay. Well, I mean, in my humble opinion, my preference would be to license the brilliant and elegant solution that Tesla has come up with, just because of the size of the connector and the weight of the connector and the flexibility, and it's just amazing that they can do that with such a elegant connector. And if you look at what the industry standard is becoming with the CCS products, it's just this big ugly thing that is going to end up weighing more and is not as flexible. So we should put a group together and go ask Tesla if we can use their standard.
Yeah, that's a whole subject on its own. Ken, did you have any thoughts on that? I just saw you pop up and I didn't know if you had a comment.
Yeah, just the CCS1 is compatible, with the SAE J7072, and the CCS2 is really the European derivative. So they're both DC fast charging connectors. The level 1, level 2 J7072 SAE standard would probably not be useful in that it's an AC input, right?
Yeah.
Good point.
Yeah, we have to have the DC fast charge, as far as I know.
Mm-hmm. Exactly. Yeah, we're not going to be big drive inverters. Too much for us to pack.
Yeah.
Any other comments about charging? I was going to ask Grant about thoughts on approach separation for the aircraft, but I don't want to get off chargers if charging infrastructure, if there's any other thoughts or ideas on that. Well, there we have it. Grant, how should we be thinking about keeping the aircraft separated when we're on approach, when we don't have the benefit of FAA support necessarily?
That's a good question. It started to come up a little bit more in some of our conversations with airports and other locations we're talking to for these. In all honesty, I don't know yet. There's still too much we don't know about the aircraft flight characteristics and overall operations. So I'm not quite sure what's going to be the best way to handle that. And again, too, it's one of those, as we figure this out, and these are going to go into more and more places that are not just sort of wide open and rural, we are going to be a little bit more pressed for space. I'm not quite sure how that's going to be managed, especially since, as we've seen, the number of aircraft that are not on wheels, that are sitting on skids. So being able to move aircraft around safely and efficiently, too, getting them into and out of parking and storage spaces and whatnot, or kind of having them land in I don't want to say a walled off, but a little bit more kind of protected area, and then moving it quickly and efficiently, especially if there is inclement weather. That's probably a whole other working group to try to.
I think it is too. It would be wonderful if we could see a technological solution, right? Where the computers could be in charge of the separation, but that adds weight, that adds complexity, and there can be knock-on effects when, what does that mean if I get too close to you and your aircraft backs off? What's the knock-on effect to, your aircraft quickly moving without your
exactly
it.
And then going closer to another one, which then moves it closer to another one, and now all of a sudden you're into some of the safety areas, and then it's just, it's one big domino effect.
Yeah. But there's a lot of aircraft out there with open rotors, right? And you can have a catastrophic event just from contact. So it gives us pause, I'm sure, when we think about, right now there's just a few aircraft out there at a time. We saw Opener was by itself in the black fly at Oshkosh, but I think our intent is all to blacken the skies, or at least have
Pretty
a lot
much
more traffic. Yeah, and I think that we are going to have a lot of traffic, but we need to think about in advance about how we're going to build separation into our plans to avoid any issues.
Absolutely, and I think that's going to have to probably end up being another working group, and it's probably a solution that's 5, 6, 7 years off, probably at the earliest. Again, just depending on how quickly the industry grows and matures, and a solution for that for, say, Los Angeles is going to be different than that of somewhere in Alaska and somewhere in Oshkosh. So there isn't going to be one solution for that, because again, it's going to be dependent on what is the primary vehicle usage at that particular vertiport. What is their rotor configuration? What other safety features might they have that are vehicle specific, that are built in? And then kind of how much space do we have to kind of spread out a little bit?
Yeah. The one big saving grace that we have going for us, which is very different than general aviation or commercial aviation, is that we can hover. So if we need to just stop and say, okay, everyone stop moving, or you stay in your place and there's a queue and you hover until it's your time, that's our big superpower, right? That's our advantage, is we can all do that. We can have a queue and everybody sits still, and we don't have to have a lot of aircraft flying in a pattern, just to burn time to build separation. We can just stay put, and that may be a software issue where it's just about getting in a queue, and then a computer assigns you with a physical location where you get a box and you go sit in that box and you're there until it's your time, and then once it's your time, you can leave your box and go put the aircraft down on the pad.
Yep, absolutely.
So that could be a technological solution. Anybody else have any thoughts on separation? We got about 5 minutes left, so we might wind down soon. But Steve, did you have a comment?
Yeah, well, I think that by the time the air gets crowded with these things, that we definitely need AI-based, cloud air traffic management system that's all knowing and is telling each aircraft which voxel they can be in at any given time. But the thing that I would, I guess, if traffic like that becomes an issue, which probably it ultimately will, I see the aircraft coming in, landing, offloading, and then the aircraft goes and parks itself in a field or lot nearby, because there's these things still need to be parked if they're personal, if they're not air taxis, right? So
correct.
So there may need to be an off airport, if you will, charging lot or charging station that these things could be lined up and left on the charger. I don't know. It's a good puzzle. I'm definitely a proponent. I'm pitching it everywhere I go, and the municipalities out here, the feedback I get is that, build it and they will come is not, doesn't work. That's the first knee-jerk feedback that I get. So I don't know if you have any recommendations for that or thoughts.
Well, I know we've seen a lot of people pretty excited about the "if you build it, they will come." I think as the vehicles get through, more and more vehicles get through the certification process and are ready for general sale and use, they're not going to have a choice but to land at FAA certified vertiports. So all of a sudden, if you want one, you're going to have to go fly it where you're allowed to land. And whether that's going to be Oshkosh or Grand Forks or somewhere in Alaska or what have you, that's going to be your option. So that's why then it goes back to being important there's an infrastructure solution that can be rolled out very quickly for the markets that really want this. So if you want an eVTOL, you're only going to be able to fly it and operate it, especially if you're going to be carrying passengers, where there's a FAA certified vertiport. So it's going to limit where you're allowed to fly, very quickly. But I think as more airports, more communities kind of really understand that, they're going to realize very quickly we're going to have to make the investment either in a Volatus pad or whichever pad, so they can support eVTOL traffic.
Okay. So Grant, we're just about out of time, and so I want to jump in and say thank you very much for contributing your time today and your wisdom and great answers to some complicated questions. So we really appreciate your contribution here, and really happy to have you on the team. We're all going to continue to need to work together on these issues.
My pleasure. Thank you very much.
If anyone wants to know more, please by all means contact Grant directly. His company is called Volatus Infrastructure, and the website is volatuslc.com. Some housekeeping. We've got I'm looking for a speaker for next month, so stay tuned for that. And any ideas, please by all means send them my way, up to and including your own organization, talking about what it does and what issues it's working on in this space. In November, we may be able to have Yakov, who was with us earlier from Droni, talking about their aircraft, which would be fantastic to learn about that. And then
They said
just in terms of housekeeping, we as an organization are sponsored by the Vertical Flight Society and facilitated by NASA. And Vertical Flight Society will be stepping up their support level. So we're going to have probably a new administrator to support us from Vertical Flight Society. And I think that's going to be Nicholas Zart. I'm going to have a conversation with him, but he's a great guy with great experience who's just joined Vertical Flight Society, and will be able to work with us and our team to kind of build it and continue to work on putting talks and discussions like this together.
Hi, Andrew.
Chuck. Yep, Chuck.
Yeah, I had major computer problems. I had to reinstall the operating system and reinstall Teams to get on.
Wow,
I don't know.
Quite a bit of work.
Yeah, it was. I managed to do that pretty fast. So my apologies. I will have to get on the phone and discuss what we discussed this meeting, if you would. Thanks.
Yeah, for sure. Absolutely. Before we wind down, any other questions or ideas or issues before we let you go? Anyone?
Yeah, Andrew, I have one question real quick. Is there a social media group for this group, or is it only through these meetings that we talk?
We have not been great about the social media side, just because it's just been Chuck and I, and we haven't been able to contribute the time to it, although I'd love to. Things will change as we get more support from Vertical Flight Society. So I think the support organization will be changing over somewhat.
Chuck here. Yeah, NASA does not encourage social media for a lot of its work for this sort of thing. So I think we, in the future through VFS, are really open to doing social media to expand the cause.
Okay, thank you. Yeah, I was looking around for like a LinkedIn group or something like that, but I'll stay tuned for whatever ends up happening in the future.
David, I'm glad you brought that up. We're going to have a call with our coordinator at Vertical Flight Society, Nicholas Zart. He is he was previously a journalist, so he's really good at this sort of thing. I'll ask him that question about how we can build our exposure to social media and reach out to more people and communicate with more people that way. So thanks for bringing that up, David. All right, and with that, we'll close out the meeting if there's nothing else. Thank you everybody for attending, and we'll keep you posted about October and November's meetings.
Sounds good. Thank you, everyone.
Guys, cheers. Bye-bye.
Thanks, everyone.